Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to the Movies TV Mad Daily on this Friday. On today's show, we talk about the Batman, the Caped Crusader animated series produced by J.J. Abrams, Matt Reeves and Bruce Timm being sold off to Amazon Prime. Then we talk about Bob Iger speaking out about the MCU and Marvel Studios' future. Very, very curious statements from Bob Iger. I have strong opinions about the situation, and I don't really think he understands the issues at Disney and at Marvel Studios. But first of all, let's discuss the breaking news that the Batman animated series produced by J.J. Abrams, Bruce Timm, and the fantastic Matt Reeves is moving from HBO Max to Amazon Prime. And I also want to discuss what that means for selling Snyderverse to Netflix. So basically, it's now been confirmed. We've known this for quite a while that Zaslav wanted to sell off the Batman Caped Crusader, the sequel to the original Batman, the animated series. Basically, the Zaslav wanted to sell it off to another streamer. He's done it. This is his way of raising that $3 billion. And as far as I'm concerned, it's not an issue. It's not negative. Why not just keep it on HBO Max? It's a huge project, an exciting project for all DC nerds. Here's the facts. HBO Max is not available to every country around the world. You would be surprised where HBO Max is not available. It's not available in the UK. The only way you can see HBO Max content like The Last of Us is if you have a Sky TV subscription. To have everything on Sky, like the sports, the movies, the children's pack, the entertainment pack, it's nearly £100, £100 a month. Now, I do have a Now TV subscription, which is basically Sky TV as a streaming service, but it's very, very expensive. And a lot of you in the UK can't afford to have Now TV or Sky TV. So basically what this means is, if you're in the UK, you know, the UK is an English-speaking country. It's the first English-speaking country, and you don't have access to HBO Max content unless you can afford Sky TV. Peacemaker was also on Sky TV. You had to wait several months to be able to buy Peacemaker on, digital, Blu-ray, DVD, and I don't even think it's available on 4K. By then, you would have been spoiled over on social media, especially Twitter. Now, as well as trying to upscale that $3 billion that Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery desperately need, it's not just about money. It's about getting that project to as many people as possible. And it will be interesting if the Lantern HBO Max show and the Wonder Woman Paradise Lost show will also be sold off to Amazon Prime or to Netflix. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, at the moment, those shows are tapped to be exclusively on HBO Max, but originally on announcement, the Caped Crusader was also tapped to be on HBO Max. They later announced that they were selling it off to another streamer. And this could be the same situation with James Gunn's Lantern, or Lantern should I say, and the Wonder Woman's show that's tapped to be on HBO Max, Paradise Lost. I'm assuming that they also will be sold off to another streamer. So what does this actually mean for the campaign to sell Snyderverse to Netflix? Well, here's the difference, because I've noticed the people doing the campaign, a great campaign I support, because I love Snyderverse as well as the other corners of DC live action and animation. I want to see Justice League 2. I want to see Justice League 3. I want to see the Batfleck movie. I want to see Man of Steel 2. And this is what this campaign is attempting to do. But what they're not telling you is that there's a big difference. The difference is that the Snyderverse is not in active development, so it's very different to the Batman Caped Crusader animated series. There's a difference between being in active development, actually having content to sell to a streamer, and basically what the sell Snyderverse to Netflix thing is trying to do. It's trying to prove to Netflix as a company that there's an audience to continue the Snyderverse. It's a harmless, it's a pure campaign, and I support it. And people telling people to move on are really, on the wrong side of history as far as I'm concerned. It doesn't affect you. You're excited for what Gunn and Saffron are doing. What they're fighting for doesn't hurt you from getting what Gunn and Saffron are doing, because that's happening whatever the Snyderverse stands say or do. It's happening. And the only way that gets damaged if people don't go to movie theatres and don't sit and watch the shows on streaming. Comprende? You understand? So let that Snyderverse campaign happen. It doesn't hurt you. You can't stop it anyway. I think there's another campaign, another trending event on social media on the 14th of March, if I recall accurately. And I'll be there hashtagging and retweeting your tweets. I absolutely support it. But there's a big difference. But what this means is that Warner Brothers are in the market of selling off content to other streamers in terms of DC, but it just won't stop at DC. It hasn't stopped at DC. They've sold off one or two streaming projects, originally tapped for HBO Max to other streamers as well. So this can only be a positive thing if you're really hoping and campaigning for to sell Snyderverse to Netflix. Don't forget that Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon on IMDb is the most anticipated Netflix project tapped to be released this year. Now, this is interesting considering some people claim that Zack Snyder is one of the most hated creatives in Hollywood, that people don't like him. Clearly, people know that Zack Snyder is a very talented individual, and there's a lot of people, not just the Snyderverse stands, who love Batfleck, who love Cavill's Superman, who want to see Justice League 2, want to see Justice League 3. Don't forget, Zack Snyder's Justice League was verified fresh by verified critics on Rotten Tomatoes. The general audience mostly enjoyed that mammoth of a movie. So Zack Snyder is class. And, for his Rebel Moon to be the most anticipated Netflix project that's tapped to be released this year says a lot. So I'm happy that the Batman the Caped Crusader animated series will be on Amazon Prime. It's a place that I have a subscription. It's a place I have access to. So that's very, very good news to me. People being negative about this, why does it affect you whether it's on HBO Max or Amazon Prime or Netflix? It really doesn't affect you. As long as you've got a subscription, and look, maybe if you've got a subscription to HBO Max because you were expecting all the DC content to be on HBO Max, it's a Warner Brothers streaming service after all. The future of HBO Max is very, very interesting because Zaslav has announced a Warner Brothers television streaming service coming soon. Now, I don't know if this will be available globally or not. And will this change their stance? Will they continue to sell off stuff when they launch that ad-based streaming service? Or is it just another notch to their bow? And what does this mean for HBO Max? Also, HBO Max and Discovery Plus, which is Discovery's streaming service, were going to merge as one. That is no longer going to happen. Does this give credence to the rumours that Zaslav next year is planning on selling Warner Brothers Discovery? That's a very interesting premise because it makes sense that you wouldn't want to merge Discovery Plus and make that part of a sale deal because you want to keep that separately. You want the Discovery company separate to Warner Brothers and you want to keep that to yourself. So there probably is a little bit of credence in the rumours that Zaslav is planning to raise, the reputation of Warner Brothers so he can sell it off next year. That's the earliest he can start, negotiations to sell Warner Brothers. I've said it before, I say it again. I don't want that to happen. I want Warner Brothers to remain an independent studio. It's, along with Disney, one of the biggest studios in the world. It's got a proud history. It's celebrating its 100 years this year. So this is a very, very sad situation. I hope it doesn't happen. I think HBO Max could become an exclusive like HBO content-based streamer, and all the Warner Brothers stuff goes on the new Warner Brothers television streaming service. So that's going to be very, very interesting. Just to reiterate though, that Matt Reeves, J.J. Abrams, and Bruce Timm's brand new Batman animated series, The Caped Crusader, has been sold off to Amazon Prime, and that's very exciting because we in the UK and all over the world will actually have access to it. So that's part of your DC news. Now, David Ayer has been responding to fans shitting on the original theatrical release of The Suicide Squad. And again, telling people that that wasn't his film, that that film was rewritten and re-edited. It wasn't his movie. And it's very interesting when David comes onto Twitter and starts talking about it. Now, he's asking the question as well. He's very blatant and direct as well. He said, why is it a PG movie? Why isn't it R-rated? And he said, AKA, it's business. And he's absolutely bang on here. But what's interesting about this, Joker movie was rated R, and it was banned in China, and it made over $1 billion. That's amazing. Who made that decision? It's interesting because more than likely it was Toby Emmerich. Toby Emmerich, was the one who messed with, all the DC stuff and didn't want Snyder around. So it's very, very interesting, isn't it, that he was okay with Joker being an R-rated movie. And, he knew it was banned in China as well. I mean, nobody knew that film was going to make so much money, but it makes sense. Joker is a huge character in DC. Joaquin Phoenix is one of the most iconic actors in the history of the entertainment medium. So it kind of makes sense. Also, you had extremists telling people if they went to see the movie, they could end up getting shot and killed. So when you tell people not to do something, if you tell people not to have too much sugar in their tea or eat too many cream cakes, what do? They go and buy 100 cream cakes. So people, to spite the extremists, went to see Joker and they loved it. And they went to see it again and again and again. It's one of the best DC movies ever made. Fact, one of the best movies ever made, away from the CBM genre as well. So David Ayer is still trying to explain the situation to misinformed souls, whose mind is closed, as he puts it, to the truth. That his movie was tampered with, that the theatrical version of that movie isn't his movie. But what's interesting about the theatrical version is it made just under 800 million. That movie didn't even cost 100 million to make, but it did have an expensive marketing drive. That shouldn't be forgotten. But if that theatrical version made just under 800 million, how much money would of David Ayer's The Ayer Cut made on the big screen? Surely it's a better movie. It has a composed score. It doesn't have radio music. So surely to God, it would have made a lot more money. Surely to God, why not release it? I'll tell you why. Because if he releases it, it exposes their flawed thinking. It exposes their mistake. Because make no mistake about it, Toby Emmerich may not be running Warner Brothers Pictures anymore, but he's somewhere in the background. He's been given his own production company, which Warner Brothers has an exclusive deal with. So Toby Emmerich is still there. So not everything has changed at Warner Brothers Pictures, but he just doesn't have the power he used to, thankfully. But to be fair to Toby, he also made some really good decisions for Warner Brothers Pictures, such as greenlighting the Joker movie. You know, Walter Hamada, that at the time, the DC film president, didn't want that movie to go ahead because he felt it will create the same problems as the Snyderverse did. But Toby Emmerich said, no, this is away from the DCEU. It can't hurt the DCEU. That's the difference with this decision. Excuse me. But this is what they should have done with the Snyderverse. The Snyderverse should have been an Elseworld bunch of movies, and then they would have been successful. People would have understood it's nothing to do with the main, interconnected franchise. They should have went another direction with the mainstream interconnected franchise, and they didn't. They made a mistake. Now, they're your talking points for DC today. Now I want to talk about Marvel. Sometimes on this channel, I will talk about Marvel because I find this a very interesting piece of subject matter. So we all know that Bob Iger has returned as CEO of Disney. They're so desperate. They're in free fall. They're on multiple debt. They owe more money. They need to raise more than $3 billion, which is the amount that David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery need to raise, but they're not talking about it. But anyway, he was talking somewhere, question and answer session, and he spoke up about the future of Marvel Studios, and what he said stunned me. What I like about Zaslav, he doesn't talk about the creative process of DC Universe. He respects James Gunn and Peter Safran to do that themselves. If it doesn't work out, then he'll interfere, quite right too. But he's allowing them, he's giving them their rope. They're allowed to do what they want to do, and hopefully for him, the studio, and the fans, it works out. But Bob Iger actually came out and said that we need to start telling these characters' stories. He was talking about the fact that Marvel Studios has got all these characters and they're not telling their stories. He also said that yes, we want sequels, having a first and a second movie, that's important, but do we need a third movie and a fourth movie? So under this premise that he's talking about, there would be no Thor Ragnarok, which would have been a shame. And there wouldn't have been Thor Love and Thunder, which would have been an absolution if you ask most Marvel fans. So he's talking about telling the stories of the characters that they're not telling. Now, what's interesting about this, he's a CEO. He's not a storyteller. The choice not to greenlight George Lucas's sequel trilogy shows you how misinformed and how lackluster and know nothing this man is. But he was riding on the coattails of some good Pixar animation. He was riding on the coattails of Kevin Feige's and all the other people's hard work at Marvel Studios, and he looked like a really good CEO, and he was making money. And when he bought Lucasfilm, he looked like a genius. Now he looks like a mug because the decisions that have been made, the person who's in charge of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, we discussed that in my Star Wars video. So go and check that out. It's on the Star Wars portion of my playlist. But, if I was Kevin Feige, I'd be a bit miffed about this statement. Someone telling me how to do my job publicly. Because I think it's very, very interesting, isn't it? Has he already? You would imagine, if this has been done professionally, that Iger and Feige and Marvel Studios have had discussions, and maybe this is the decisions they've made together. But it does seem a bit off the cuff to me. So let's see what he said. He said he doesn't want a third and fourth movie to these characters. He wants to start telling the other stories. He seems to have misidentified the problems at Marvel Studios and Disney. The problem is at Marvel and Disney that they have become so passively aggressively extremist. A word that you'll understand better, a word I don't like because it means something else and it's being kind of kind of weaponized now is woke. They've become woke. The other problem for Marvel Studios and Disney is the volume of Star Wars they want to put out, the volume of Marvel Studios content they want to put out. They rush things and the quality isn't there. The Kenobi series is evidence of that. It was clumsily directed. It didn't look slick. It didn't look polished. And now we're seeing all these MCU films and streaming shows in, phase 4. It didn't look polished. The Black Widow looked a very clumsily directed movie as well. And, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, VFX, criticized. Multiple, VFX artists has come out to complain the pressure the studio put them under, and if they don't reach the schedule, then they don't use that VFX company again. And Marvel makes so much content, they're so huge, VFX companies can't afford to lose their contracts. So they're the problems at Marvel. So as long as they remain extremist or woke or whatever words you want to use, as long as this high output of volume remains, customers will slip through their fingers because the quality isn't going to be there. The big problem started from phase 4 when they started, deciding to do multiple Disney Plus MCU content. And that has put pressure on Marvel Studios because they're not willing to invest on an extra workforce to do the extra work. So they are now making MCU content on the cheap. That's what Bob Iger didn't discuss. Talking about not making a third and a fourth movie isn't the issue. It's like after the rise of Skywalker when they said, oh, I know the problem with Star Wars. We had a movie every year. People got fed up. People got Star Wars fatigue. No, that wasn't the problem. That was a very exciting announcement from the day they bought Lucasfilm. We didn't get Star Wars fatigue. We got bad Star Wars fatigue. And the shit they were putting out was bad. That's why Star Wars isn't making any money, that we haven't seen a Star Wars movie in movie theatres for 4 years. They will never publicly admit what they're doing wrong. They won't even admit to themselves what they're doing wrong. When you look at She-Hulk, the finale actually abusing its own customers and then seeing interviews with the showrunner saying, we're so proud to be abusing our customers. That's the problem at Marvel Studios. That's the problem at Disney. It's their passive aggressive extremism, and it's the volume without any quality being put out. Let's go back to the original, MCU. Iron Man was well done. Captain America was well done. We cared about Stark. We cared about Captain America, Steve Rogers. We cared about Thor. We cared about Black Widow. The Incredible Hulk was a faithfully adapted movie to the comics. He felt like a real Bruce Banner, a relatable Bruce Banner. And it was a great story, right? As was the first Iron Man film, as were the first 2, and even maybe you could argue the first 3 Captain America movies. They made 3 movies. It's only when they started, when their bellies got bigger than their appetites and they got greedy and they saw the success of the first Avengers, this is when the real problems started. For the Dark World wasn't a good film. I like the first Thor movie. I do like Ragnarok, mainly because Hulk and Thor are teaming up. That's the energy of that film, and anyone could have directed that script, not just Taika Waititi. He became an overrated director because of that film. So the MCU started with the right motivations, but then the industry went insane and it became an extremist industry that started abusing the straight white male. And like the people in Marvel now, they're against telling straight romance stories in the MCU. These are the lunatics working in this industry today. So Bob Iger standing there telling the fans, basically, because they're seeing all this and they're reading this on the internet, that Marvel's problems is that it has third and fourth movies. No, it's what you do with those third and fourth character movies. The problem is they're not telling the stories of all their characters. Of course you want to tell the stories of all these characters being introduced, but ultimately you are telling those stories. You are getting a Captain America 4. I mean, you could do a Miss Marvel movie, but you're pretty much getting that in the Marvels anyway. And the more characters they introduce, the more they go down the list of characters that people are not interested in. But to be fair, no one was interested in Iron Man before we saw the Iron Man movie. So it's about doing things well. Unfortunately, when you're using the people who make Rick and Morty, it's a problem. That's the direction Feige and Marvel Studios are going down. Because I love Rick and Morty, but I wouldn't get the people who make Rick and Morty to make a Michelin-star restaurant meal. I wouldn't get them to make my movies because they're good at animation, they're good at telling stories via the platform of animation, but you don't bring them in to tell Marvel Cinematic Universe stories. It makes no sense. But the biggest problem for Disney and Marvel, they're one of the few studios now who are passively aggressively extremist, who are extra woke, and this is why customers are slipping through their fingers. And Disney don't look like that they're listening. They don't understand the direction they're going in is wrong. And when Iger says we want to tell all these characters' stories, what characters do you want to tell? They've got this series now celebrating International Women's Day called Empower, celebrating the females in the MCU, or as some people call it, the MCU. And it's not being called that for no reason, because it's okay to have female characters, to have female characters of colour, but they should be standing there with the male characters as well, because that's how reasonable people work. Isn't that what we want? But that's not what they want. They want females and minority characters to replace straight white males. We are now not reasonable people, because if you think that's equality, then you haven't been paying attention. That is hatred. That is revenge. That's saying, well, 30, 40 years ago, there was only straight white males getting big roles on the TV and entertainment kind of industry. So we need to get some revenge now. So we need all the minorities and women to take the place of the straight white male. But that is not how it works. Of course, the world has treated minorities and women cruelly in the past, but revenge doesn't solve the problem. What we should be doing is doing what they should have done all those years ago. Basically, employ the most talented people, write the best stories, and by a happy accident, you will get the representation and inclusion you need. We are now looking at the Oscars making more decisions next year, so Academy members have to nominate more minorities and women. If you're good enough, you should get nominated and you should be rewarded. If you're not good enough, you shouldn't be getting rewards because you're a black woman or a black man or a Mexican or an Asian. That's not how, sane people work in a sane world. But we're no longer part of a sane world. There's special award ceremonies for black people and black women. How does that work? That means they're not going against the most talented people. They're closing themselves off. That's not how a premise of an award should be. Finally today, I want to talk about Jenna Ortega. Jenna Ortega, the actress, has basically hit superstar fame with basically former Smallville showrunners show Wednesday, which is based on the Addams family. And Jenna has been great, but she came out in an interview criticizing the writers of the show and saying that she fixed a lot of the lines because Wednesday wouldn't have done a certain amount of those things. Now, a lot of people, a lot of writers in the industry have taken issue with this, and I agree with them. She should never have come out publicly and criticised the writing. Now, some male feminists say, why should she stay silent? Because we're not talking about sexual harassment here. We're not talking about an abuse of power. We're talking about an actress looking at a script and saying, I don't like this and I don't like that. For all we know, our Miles and the writing team were just humouring her and allowed her to change a few words. Do you remember Joey in Friends when he went around saying he changes his scripts and dialogue? Next thing he found out, he was killed off, falling down a lift shaft in Days of Our Lives. And I always remind people of that when I see actors on Twitter say, oh yeah, I didn't like the writing, I changed this and I changed that. There's a reason that basically the writers of Friends actually put that into the show, because creatives hate it when actors do it. I write, act, produce and direct in my own original plays. I constantly get actors saying, Mick, can I change this? Can I change that? I don't think my character would do this. I don't think my character would do that. That's not disrespectful. That's fine. I either agree with them and I make the changes, or I don't. I put my arm around them, pat them on the head, say, there. I'm always happy to get your feedback, as I am. But if they stand outside of the local theatre because I'm making this stuff for my local community, and they're shit talking me about my writing, and not even coming to me, but just talking publicly about this to the local press, I'm going to be hurt. I'm going to be offended. Now, our Miles must be hurt about this. Our Miles are great, legendary, iconic dudes. They created Smallville. But when talking about her in the press, they were very complimentary. They said she's great, she's very talented, they always wanted her, they think she's very, very special. But this is the problem. Everyone is intimidated. Males are intimidated in the industry now of women. They're scared about talking out about women. What's happened here with Jenna Ortega is this is a young female who's believing her own publicity, because women now have diplomatic immunity. Let me give you an analogy here. If Jenna Ortega was a man and basically the showrunners were a woman, and she was a he, and he was shit talking the female showrunners, what would have Twitter have done? Twitter would have called that actor a misogynist and being disrespectful to the showrunners. So it's very, very, very interesting the way that this is gone. And finally today, have I already said and finally today? Well, this is definitely finally and finally. So I've had a bit to talk about today. So Jennifer Lawrence there's been a trailer for a Jennifer Lawrence kind of raunchy rom-com, because people want to see rom-coms back. Now the story is because Jennifer Lawrence must be around 25 or 30 now. So her character is going after a 19-year-old boy. She wants a 19-year-old boy and she's trying to seduce him. Now we've heard Jennifer Lawrence talk about toxic masculinity and, talking about being sexualized. But it seems to be okay with the hypocrisy in Hollywood for an older woman to try and seduce a 19-year-old boy. Let me reverse this again. If Jennifer Lawrence's character was a man, if Jennifer Lawrence wasn't Jennifer Lawrence and it was a bloke and it was a 30-year-old bloke, and the 19-year-old was female and the guy was trying to seduce the 19-year-old girl, what would you lot be screaming? You lot would be screaming nonce and pedo, wouldn't you? What's the difference when it's a woman? Diplomatic immunity. They've got diplomatic immunity. This is Hollywood hypocrisy of the highest order. I don't mind them doing this film. I don't mind them having a hot actress trying to seduce a 19-year-old guy. It's a bit problematic, I suppose. But look, I don't know why they've decided to do this. But ultimately, what really, irks me about it is the fact that they talk about toxic masculinity, that they talk about being sexualized as women. It's okay for them to sexualize Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence seems to be okay about being sexualized when she's seducing a 19-year-old lad. It's wrong, everyone. It's hypocritical, and this is where we are with these extremists. This has been the Movies TV Man Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection, and I'll see you in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.